Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of precision.
Right.
It feels like engineering, you know?
Okay.
Break your
Okay.
arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black film, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Yeah, that is the problem.
Exactly.
It's totally binary, broken or not broken.
Right.
It's clean, visible, and I mean, it's deeply comforting because it can be categorized. We desperately want the world to operate on that level of visible certainty.
But then you step into the world of human society, or neurodevelopment,
Mhm.
or trauma, or just, interpersonal relationships,
Sure.
even just the daily resentments of a marriage, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally useless.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
And if you want to understand how those muddy waters operate, not just in a single human mind, but like on a grand systemic scale.
You have to look at the anatomy of an entire community.
Exactly. You have to dissect the social tissue.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. So we are talking directly to you, the learner.
That's right.
Whether you are frantically prepping for some grueling literature exam and need to know every critical argument, or you're just insanely curious,
Which we love.
and you want to conquer one of the most formidable, imposing texts in the English language, this deep dive is built for you.
It really is.
Because we are going to master George Eliot's Middlemarch.
A massive undertaking.
It's huge. We are giving you a comprehensive cover-to-cover breakdown of the novel's themes, its intersecting characters, the microscopic literary techniques,
The really intricate
and the massive philosophical underpinnings beneath it all.
It is a staggering undertaking, honestly. But there is a reason this book sits at the absolute pinnacle of English literature.
Yeah, to set the stage for exactly what we are dealing with here, I want you to think about Jane Austen.
Okay, classic.
Right, so in her novel Northanger Abbey, Austen includes this famous, heavily ironic defense of the novel, where a character dismisses a book by saying, oh, it is only a novel.
Ah, yes. I
And
love that part.
Right. Austen was poking fun at the pervasive 19th century idea that novels were just, silly, frivolous things for women to read in the parlor.
Not serious art.
Exactly. Well, Middlemarch takes that dismissal, throws it on the ground, and stomps it into dust.
It really does.
Henry James, who was a fiercely critical contemporary of Eliot's, he wrote this bewildered, awestruck review of the book.
He was just blown away.
He really was. He looked at the immense, staggering scope of it and asked this question, and he said, if we write novels so, how shall we write history?
I mean, let that quote hang there for a second. How should we write history? James recognized that Middlemarch, which was published in 8 installments between 1871 and 1872, by the way,
Right.
was something entirely new in the history of human storytelling.
Right.
It isn't just a romance or some light social comedy.
Definitely not.
It is a novel of profound doubleness and contradictions. Like, decades later, Virginia Woolf would look back and claim it was one of the few English novels written for grown-up people.
Grown-up people. I love that.
Yeah,
That implies a level of moral complexity that just refuses to give you easy answers.
exactly.
So before we can even open the text and walk through the front door of this provincial town, we have to understand the architect.
We really do.
We have to trace the author's incredibly scandalous, radical life. Because you absolutely cannot understand the central conflict of Middlemarch
The brutal tension between individual freedom and societal duty.
without understanding the mind of Marianne Evans.
Marianne Evans, born in 1819, who the world would, of course, come to know as George Eliot.
Right.
And to understand her mind, you really have to realize she was not some quiet, compliant Victorian lady turning out polite, moralistic tales.
Oh,
She was a radical intellectual insurgent.
her life story reads like a thriller about intellectual deconstruction.
It really does.
Like, she starts out deeply pious. She attends boarding school. She's the absolute model of an evangelical young woman.
Very devout.
But then, as she takes on household responsibilities after her mother dies, she just starts reading.
Voraciously.
Yes. She devours books on the historical relationship between the Bible and science, geology, astronomy.
The hard sciences.
Right, and she just begins to dismantle her own worldview. By the time she is 23, she actively rebels against her father and refuses to attend church.
We have to pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
Refusing to attend church in a provincial English town in the 1840s wasn't just, a personal preference.
It was a huge deal.
It's social suicide. It caused a massive rift in her family. But the thing is, she didn't just quietly step away from religion.
No, she escalated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She took on the gargantuan task of translating Ludwig Feuerbach's highly controversial text, The Essence of Christianity, from German into English.
Which is wild, and we will get deep into Feuerbach's philosophy later because it literally structures the ending of Middlemarch. It's so foundational.
But just the short version for now, Feuerbach argued religion is an entirely human construct.
Right.
He claimed we took all the best parts of humanity, love, mercy, justice, and projected them onto an imaginary being in the sky.
Basically inventing God in our own image.
Exactly. So by translating this, Marianne Evans is swimming in some very deep, very dangerous intellectual waters.
Oh, completely.
She is actively importing radical German deconstruction into Victorian England.
And her personal life was just as defiant of convention as her intellectual life, honestly.
Tell me about it.
By 1854, she made a decision that forever severed her from polite society. She chose to live openly with George Henry Lewes.
And he was a highly respected journalist,
A journalist, a philosopher, a scientist, yeah. But he was also married.
The plot thickens.
Yes, he was trapped in a highly complicated open marriage with a woman who is actually having children with another man.
Wow.
But because of the labyrinthine divorce laws of the time, Lucy couldn't legally annul the marriage.
So they were stuck. Exactly. So Evans and Lewis just decide to live together as husband and wife in every sense but the legal one.
I can't even imagine. The gossip must have been absolutely deafening.
It ruined her reputation.
Yeah.
She was completely isolated. Her own brother stopped speaking to her entirely.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, but she owned it entirely. She wrote this incredible letter to a friend where she basically said, women who are content with light and easily broken ties do not act as I have done.
Oh, wow. So she's saying, I am taking this more seriously than people who are legally married in a church.
Exactly. But obviously, this creates a massive logistical problem for her.
Right.
She has a brilliant mind. She wants to write fiction that encompasses science, political reform, medicine, and philosophy.
But she is a scandalous, quote-unquote, fallen woman in the eyes of the 19th century literary establishment.
Yeah, and the gatekeepers of Victorian publishing had very strict, very patronizing expectations for female authors.
They wanted them to stay in their lane.
Exactly. Domestic romances, sentimental poetry, maybe a light moral fable if you're lucky.
Right, nothing too heavy.
They were certainly not expected to write sweeping, encyclopedic analyses of parliamentary reform and biological tissue theory.
Which is why the pseudonym George Eliot functions exactly like a Trojan horse.
A perfect analogy.
It's just brilliant. She takes this staggering encyclopedic knowledge of the world, she packs it into this giant wooden horse called George Eliot, and she wheels it right up to the gates of the literary establishment.
And they totally fell for it.
They open the gates, they read the book, they are completely conquered by its genius, they praise this, brilliant new male mind.
Yes.
And then out steps Marianne Evans.
The ultimate reveal.
By the time they realized a scandalous woman wrote it, it was too late. She had already conquered them.
It was a necessary mechanism, though, to force the world to judge her work purely on its intellectual merit.
Free from the gendered assumptions.
Exactly, and free from the moral panic surrounding her personal life. But, even with that shield, creating the architecture of Middlemarch almost broke her.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. If we look at the actual construction history of the novel, she suffered a paralyzing bout of writer's block in 1869.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she wrote in her journal that she was in a state of absolute despair. She had all these ideas floating around, but she couldn't build a structure.
So what did she actually have at that point?
Well, she had this one story she was calling Miss Brooke, which was entirely focused on this idealistic, hyper-theoretical, young, aristocratic woman named Dorothea.
Okay, so that's one piece.
Right. And completely separately, she was outlining a narrative about a young, ambitious, arrogant doctor named Tertius Lydgate.
Oh, who arrives in a provincial town hoping to revolutionize medicine.
Exactly. For months, these were two entirely different projects.
Until she realized they are the exact same story, just in different fonts.
Basically, yes.
You have two visionaries, both of them have a desperate sense of vocation, both want to fundamentally change the world,
Yeah.
and both of them are about to slam headfirst into the immovable brick wall of provincial reality.
That's the core of it. And when she fused those two manuscripts together, Middlemarch was born.
That's incredible.
The structural genius of that fusion becomes super apparent in Chapter 10 of the novel.
Chapter 10.
If you are analyzing this book for its narrative architecture, Chapter 10 is the absolute keystone.
Because of the dinner party, right?
Yes. Mr. Brooke, who is Dorothea's bumbling uncle, throws a dinner party.
Right.
Up until this point in the book, we've mostly been sequestered with the landed gentry. But at this dinner party, Eliot brings disparate classes, different professions, and entirely separate storylines into one single dining room.
It's polyphony.
Exactly.
You're reading the chapter, and it's like you're standing in a crowded room tuning into different frequencies.
Over here, the town bankers are arguing about the impending 1832 reform bill.
Right, and over there, Lydgate is talking about the new French medical method of using a stethoscope.
Which the old doctors think is completely ridiculous, by the way.
Of course they do. But it establishes that none of these characters exist in a vacuum. And to pull this off, Eliot utilizes a very specific, highly controlled literary technique. Critics like David Lodge have written volumes about this.
Oh, this is crucial. We need to talk about the friction between mimesis and diegesis.
Yes. These are critical terms if you are studying narrative theory, so let's break them down for the learner.
So mimesis is the act of showing the story through direct imitation.
Showing, not telling.
Right. Primarily through character dialogue and unmediated action. It is the illusion that the characters are autonomous, just speaking for themselves on a stage.
Okay, and diegesis.
Diegesis, however, is the author telling the story in their own voice.
Right.
It is the narrator literally stepping into the frame, halting the action, summarizing history, or passing direct moral judgment on the characters.
Let's ground that in a concrete way.
Okay.
When a character in Middlemarch drops a teacup and gasps because they've just been insulted, that's mimesis.
You are watching the scene play out.
Yeah. But when the author literally freezes the frame, stops the narrative time, and says to the reader, Destiny stands sarcastic with our dramatis personae folded in her hand.
Great quote.
That is pure diegesis. That is George Eliot coming down from the clouds to tell you exactly how the universe works.
It really is. And the classic realist novel of the 19th century relies heavily on a masterly balance of these two modes.
Because she needs both to make it work.
Exactly. Eliot uses mimesis to create incredibly nuanced, psychologically devastating, lifelike scenes.
But she never relinquishes control.
Never. She constantly uses diegesis to assert ethical authority over the story.
Yeah, the narrator in Middlemarch is often described as possessing a godlike omniscience.
Very much so. She is guiding how you, the reader, should interpret the moral failures and triumphs of these people.
Which brings us to the very first words of the book.
The front door.
The prelude. Because before she even introduces a single character, Eliot uses pure diegesis to set the thematic engine for the entire 800-page novel.
The tragedy of female potential.
Exactly.
The novel opens with this sweeping historical comparison. Eliot invokes the life of Saint Teresa of Avila.
Okay, so who was Saint Teresa?
She was a 16th century Spanish mystic. She's famous for reforming the Carmelite order, preaching a life of severe austerity, and being an incredibly dynamic, active leader within the Catholic Church.
Right.
In the prelude, Eliot uses her to symbolize the archetype of the exceptional woman, a woman who possesses massive spiritual grandeur and a desperate need to act upon the world.
Okay, I have to push back hard on Eliot's use of history here.
Oh, go for it.
Because she writes this incredibly beautiful, tragic prelude where she claims that modern women who are like Saint Teresa are basically doomed.
Right.
She actually calls Saint Teresa a foundress of nothing and says her sobs were dispersed among hindrances.
Yep, she does.
But if you open a history book, the real Saint Teresa of Avila was a political and administrative powerhouse.
She really was.
She didn't fade into nothingness sobbing. She founded over 16 convents across Spain.
She was busy.
Yeah. She went toe-to-toe with the Inquisition, navigated the intense politics of King Philip II, and she was canonized as a saint.
Right.
She was the absolute antithesis of a failure. So why is George Eliot, this incredibly well-read historian, blatantly misrepresenting Saint Teresa as a tragic victim?
It's a great question, and that discrepancy is actually vital to understanding Eliot's project here.
How so?
She isn't writing a biography of the Spanish mystic.
Yeah.
You know. She is constructing a mythic archetype for the 19th century Englishwoman.
Ah.
Eliot intentionally modifies and romanticizes the history to fit her central thesis, which is highlighting the overarching constraints placed on exceptional women in her own time.
So she's using her as a symbol, not a historical fact.
Exactly. By ignoring St. Teresa's concrete historical successes, Eliot creates what critics call the Teresa complex.
The Teresa complex?
She needs St. Teresa to be a figure of tragic, thwarted ambition so she can introduce us to her modern equivalent.
Dorothea Brooke.
Yes, Dorothea Brooke.
Dorothea is a 19-year-old aristocratic woman living in the fictional provincial town of Middlemarch.
Right.
And she is practically vibrating with what Eliot calls soul hunger.
Soul hunger, yeah.
She doesn't want to play the piano or embroider cushions. She wants to draw up architectural plans to build better, healthier cottages for the tenant farmers.
She wants to actually do something.
She wants to dedicate her life to a transcendent cause. But she is completely trapped in the suffocating middlingness of provincial English life.
Where a woman's only real career option is basically marrying well.
Exactly.
And Dorothea's character is the epicenter of a massive critical debate.
Oh, the critics fought over, right?
Big time. The highly influential mid-20th century critic F.R. Leavis was brutal in his assessment of Dorothea.
What did he say?
He argued that she represents an immature daydream on the part of George Eliot.
Ouch.
Yeah. Leavis believed that Dorothea was essentially a Mary Sue, like an uncritical self-insertion by the author.
Wait, really? He thought she was just putting herself in the book.
Pretty much. He argued that Eliot applied razor-sharp irony and psychological realism to every other character in the book, but when it came to Dorothea, she lost her objectivity.
And indulged in adolescent, unchecked idealism.
Right. For Leavis, the goal of the realist novel is to demonstrate maturity, which he basically defined as outgrowing that kind of passionate, unrealistic worldview.
But then you have a critic like Lawrence Lerner who steps in to defend the Teresa complex.
Yes, Lerner has a totally different take.
Lerner points out that equating emotional maturity solely with a cynical acceptance of a dreary, compromised reality is a terrible way to live.
It really is.
He defends Dorothea, arguing that a generous, ardent nature, that burning desire to do good in the world, shouldn't just be viewed as an adolescent phase to be outgrown.
Right.
It's a fundamental ethical disagreement in literary criticism about what it actually means to grow up.
Yeah.
Like, is growing up just giving up?
That is the question. And if we look closely at the text, Eliot actually defends herself against Leavis's critique before he ever even made it.
That's so.
She doesn't make Dorothea a flawless angel.
Right.
She gives us incredibly specific scenes that expose Dorothea's own internal contradictions, her hypocrisy, and, frankly, her dangerous lack of self-awareness.
Oh, the jewel box scene.
Yes, the most famous example of this is the jewel box scene in Book 1.
This scene is a masterpiece of psychological self-deception.
It's so good. Break it down for us.
Okay, so Dorothea and her younger sister, Celia, are sitting at a table dividing up their late mother's jewelry.
Right.
Dorothea has positioned herself as the ascetic Puritan. She claims to disdain wealth. She thinks fashion is a frivolous waste of time. She is all about high-minded spiritual duty.
It is above it all.
Exactly. And Celia is the normal, pragmatic one who just likes pretty things.
Right.
So Celia opens the casket and pulls out an emerald necklace.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorothea, despite all her puritanical posturing, is completely physically mesmerized by it.
She is instantly captivated by their material beauty,
Yeah.
the way the light hits the stones.
Yeah.
But notice the cognitive gymnastics she has to perform here.
It's a...
She cannot simply say, I like these expensive jewels. That would violate her entire self-image as a modern-day ascetic.
So what does she do?
She instantly intellectualizes and spiritualizes her material desire. She looks at the emeralds and basically says, I suppose that is the reason why gems are used as spiritual emblems in the Revelation of St. John. They look like fragments of heaven.
It's a form of ethical laundering.
Ethical laundering, yes.
She's taking her basic human desire for a shiny, expensive object and washing it through this religious language so she can keep it without feeling guilty.
Exactly. It's hilarious and it's profoundly human, but it's also a massive red flag for the reader.
Why a red flag?
Because Dorothea's ability to instantly spiritualize those emeralds isn't just a quirky character trait. It's the exact same blinding mechanism she applies to human beings.
Oh, wow.
When she looks at a dry, arrogant, dusty academic like Edward Casaubon, she doesn't see a man.
No.
She sees a winged messenger from heaven. And that lack of self-awareness leaves her incredibly vulnerable when she makes the most important decision a Victorian woman can make.
Who to marry.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core exploration of the novel, the absolute grinding reality of marital incompatibility.
It is brutal in this book.
So brutal. Dorothea's idealism combined with our habit of ethical laundering, sets her on a catastrophic collision course.
She chooses to marry Edward Casaubon.
Yes.
And Casaubon is an aging, pedantic scholar. He is 27 years older than Dorothea.
Which is a huge gap.
And the narrator's descriptions of him are just ruthlessly clinical. Another character famously describes him as a great bladder for dried peas to rattle in.
I mean, that is a devastating takedown.
It's so mean. Casaubon is completely devoid of life, juice, or passion.
Nothing.
But Dorothea has this naive theoretical belief that marriage shouldn't be about romantic love. She thinks it's a state of higher duties.
Right. She doesn't want a husband in the traditional sense.
She wants a professor.
Exactly. She wants a man who will teach her Hebrew and Greek and guide her along the grandest intellectual pathways.
And Casaubon, locked in his own massive egotism, sees Dorothea not as a partner, but as a useful, devoted amanuensis.
Right. And amanuensis is essentially an intellectual servant.
Someone to copy his notes.
Someone to copy his notes, read to him when his eyes are tired, and just reflect his own perceived greatness back to him.
And we have to look at what Casaubon is actually doing with his life because it's so pathetic.
Oh, it really is.
He is writing a multi-volume opus called The Key to All Mythologies.
Sounds impressive.
It sounds impressive, but it is this sprawling, doomed academic project where he is trying to prove that all world mythologies stem from a single original biblical source.
Which, as George Eliot knew perfectly well from translating German philosophy, is an entirely obsolete project.
Because he doesn't read German.
Exactly. And all the groundbreaking new historical and biblical scholarship is coming out of Germany.
So Casaubon is engaging in what we might call intellectual hoarding.
Yes, that's a perfect way to describe it.
He is gathering thousands of notes, organizing them endlessly, but never publishing, never producing anything.
Because he is terrified of being proven wrong by the Germans.
He is using academia as a fortress to hide from lived human experience.
And their marriage crashes into reality almost the second the ceremony ends.
The honeymoon.
They travel to Rome for their honeymoon. And in terms of psychological realism, the chapters set in Rome are some of the most harrowing in 19th century literature.
They really are.
Eliot gives us an indirect yet utterly devastating portrait of emotional, intellectual, and sexual disappointment.
Because of Victorian publishing constraints, obviously Eliot cannot write explicitly about sexual dysfunction or the physical realities of the wedding night.
Right, complete cultural taboo.
But she doesn't need to. She shows us the aftermath. We find Dorothea in the Vatican museums, surrounded by all this passionate, sensual, classical art, just weeping uncontrollably.
Yeah, and we see the mechanics of Casaubon's fragile male ego in real time here.
He's so insecure.
Deeply insecure. He realizes very quickly that Dorothea is intelligent.
Too intelligent.
Too intelligent.
Yeah.
He becomes terrified that she will see through his facade and realize his key to all mythologies is a massive failure.
So what does he do?
His defense mechanism is to completely emotionally withdraw. He shuts her out, speaks to her in these freezing formal tones, and completely denies her the intellectual partnership she sacrificed her life for.
The chill of his refusal to touch her, to comfort her while she sobs in their apartment, it's all there in the subtext.
It's so painful to read.
Dorothea realizes she hasn't married a winged messenger. She has locked herself in a tomb with a corpse.
That's exactly what it is.
But Eliot is a master of symmetry. She doesn't just give us one disastrous marriage driven by delusion, she gives us a parallel catastrophe to compare it to.
We have to pivot to the story of Tertius Lydgate and Rosamund Vincy.
Let's do it. So Lydgate is the brilliant outsider.
Right.
He is a young aristocratic doctor who studied in Paris, which was the absolute center of advanced medical science at the time.
The cutting edge.
He arrives in Middlemarch full of ambition, wanting to discover the fundamental biological building blocks of life and to reform the archaic medical practices of this sleepy provincial town.
He's going to save the world.
But he falls for Rosamund Vincy.
Rosamund.
Rosamund is the town beauty. She is the daughter of the mayor. She went to an expensive finishing school, and she is completely, utterly shallow.
No interior life whatsoever.
Zero. She is obsessed with social climbing, expensive furniture, and maintaining the illusion of aristocratic elegance.
Right.
So how does a certified medical genius fall for someone so transparently vain?
Well, Eliot provides a precise diagnostic term for this. She writes that Lydgate, despite his massive scientific intellect, has a tragic flaw. She calls them his spots of commonness.
Now, a lot of people describe this as his kryptonite, but I think that's the wrong analogy.
Why is that?
Because kryptonite implies an external weakness forced upon you. Lydgate's spots of commonness operate more like a malware program running quietly in the background of a supercomputer.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like his conscious mind is doing brilliant, high-level scientific processing. He's reading advanced French anatomy texts. But this hidden cultural programming forces him to default to the most vulgar, basic assumptions the second he steps out of the lab.
The cultural programming of patriarchy.
Yes. He assumes that a wife shouldn't have an intellect. She should just be a pretty submissive ornament who plays the piano and agrees with everything he says.
And that patriarchal malware makes him incredibly easy prey for someone as socially calculating as Rosamund.
Especially in the proposal scene.
The proposal scene between them, in Chapter 31, is a masterclass in the mechanics of Victorian courtship.
Because he wasn't even planning to propose, right?
At all. Lydgate actually knows he doesn't have the money to marry yet. He goes to the Vincy house just to drop off a message.
Right.
But he finds Rosamund sitting alone, doing needlework. And because he hasn't visited in a while, she is feeling a genuine sting of rejection, and she drops her needlework. They both bend down to pick it up, and suddenly they are physically very close. Lydgate looks at her face and sees a single tear on her cheek.
And Eliot describes it with this terrifyingly beautiful phrase.
Yes. She says that moment of naturalness was the crystallizing feather touch that shook flirtation into love.
Wow.
But if we analyze the mechanics of that teardrop, the text leaves a profound, lingering ambiguity.
Was it real?
Exactly. Was that tear a moment of pure, uncalculated emotion? Or was it weaponized vulnerability?
Because Rosamond has been trained from birth at her finishing school to perform the role of the delicate, helpless, emotional female.
Right. And this scene is frequently analyzed through a feminist lens as the ultimate trap of the male gaze.
He looks at her, sees the weeping, vulnerable woman that his chivalric patriarchal code tells him he must rescue and protect.
And he is instantly hooked.
Hooked. The very power structures he benefits from as a man are the exact mechanisms that trap him in a ruinous marriage.
And it ruins him completely. Rosamund has zero interest in his medical reform. She just wants the status of being married to a man with aristocratic relatives, and she expects him to provide a life of luxury he literally cannot afford.
But to complete this romantic geometry, we need the counterpoint to Casaubon.
Yes, we need Will Ladislaw.
So Will Ladislaw is Casaubon's younger cousin.
Right.
He is a bohemian, an artist, a wanderer with what the town whispers is rebellious blood.
Because his grandmother was Polish.
Right. He is completely unmoored from the strict, duty-bound world of Middlemarch.
And think about the contrast. Casaubon is described in terms of darkness, dust, and catacombs.
Yes.
Ladislaw is constantly described in terms of sunlight, bright colors, and art.
So when Dorothea meets Ladislaw in Rome, he represents a totally different paradigm of existence.
He argues that life can be about feeling, about aesthetics and beauty, not just grim, puritanical duty.
But Ladislaw is a highly controversial figure among literary critics, isn't he?
Oh, very controversial. F.R. Leavis, whom we mentioned earlier, and the Marxist critic Arnold Kettle both viewed Ladislaw as a massive failure of Eliot's realism.
Really? Why?
They argued he is too lightweight, too much of a romanticized dream figure.
Ah, I see.
He doesn't seem to possess the psychological density or the gritty realism of a Lydgate or a Casaubon.
He feels like a plot device designed to rescue Dorothea.
Exactly, rather than a fully realized human being operating within a harsh economic reality.
Well, speaking of economic reality, these private tragedies, Dorothea sobbing in Rome, Lydgate trapped by a teardrop, they don't happen in a vacuum.
No, they do not.
They are intricately, inescapably woven into the economic and political fabric of the town.
Which bridges us directly into the central dominating metaphor of the entire novel.
The metaphor of the web?
The web. The literary critic J. Hillis Miller wrote a seminal analysis of this concept.
Let's unpack it.
The web in Middlemarch operates simultaneously on multiple structural levels. First, and most obviously, it represents the literal social network of the provincial town.
Right, everyone knows everyone.
Every character is connected by invisible threads of gossip, debt, marriage, and family history. If a banker makes a bad loan on one side of town, a doctor goes bankrupt on the other.
But the genius is how Eliot maps that social web onto biology.
Yes.
Remember Lydgate's medical research. He is obsessed with the theories of the French anatomist Xavier Bichat.
Right.
Lydgate is trying to isolate what he calls primitive tissue, the fundamental web-like biological structure that makes up all the different organs of the human body.
And Eliot is explicitly mapping the biological structure of human tissue onto the social structure of a community.
The town of Middlemarch is literally a living, breathing organism.
But crucially, a web is also a trap.
Right. Like a spider's web.
Is a labyrinth of social entrapment that catches our idealistic heroes. Lydgate thinks he can remain independent above the petty politics of the town.
But he can't.
No. The web slowly wraps around him and paralyzes him.
Yeah.
And to understand how the economics of this web function, Eliot provides us with two contrasting families that represent the massive shift in 19th century British capitalism.
The Garths and the Vinceys.
Exactly.
The Garth family, specifically Caleb Garth and his daughter Mary, are the undeniable moral center of the novel.
Caleb Garth is amazing.
He is a land manager. He isn't interested in accumulating capital or social climbing. He reveres the pure virtue of honest agrarian labor.
He values intrinsic worth.
Exactly. He loves seeing land well managed, fences properly built, crops thriving.
And that intrinsic worth is sharply contrasted with the Vincey family.
Sure.
The Vinceys represent the rising aspirational middle class built on manufacturing and trade.
So Fred Vincey, who is Rosamund's brother, he is a charming but completely irresponsible young man.
He views the world entirely through the lens of speculative capital.
He just acquires expensive habits, horses, gambling that he absolutely cannot afford.
And he's doing this based entirely on the expectation that he will eventually inherit a massive fortune from his wealthy, childless uncle.
Peter Featherstone.
Yes, Peter Featherstone.
Peter Featherstone is a monster of a man. He is a wealthy, vindictive old landowner who uses his impending death as a psychological weapon.
He loved it.
He loves dangling the promise of his will over his flock of greedy relatives, just watching them humiliate themselves for a payout.
Which leads to one of the most intense, psychologically complex scenes in the novel. It is the ultimate test of intrinsic value versus exchange value.
The deathbed scene.
Yes. Featherstone is on his deathbed. It is the middle of the night, and Mary Garth, who is poor, who works as his caretaker, and who happens to be deeply in love with Fred Vincey, is the only one awake with him.
Right.
Featherstone, in his final moments, realizes he has written two different wills, and he wants to destroy the most recent one.
But there's a catch.
The catch is, the will he wants to keep would leave a massive fortune to Fred Vincey. The one he wants to destroy leaves the money to an illegitimate son.
Right, but Featherstone is too weak to open his lockbox himself.
Yes. So he begs Mary Garth to open it. He even pulls out rolls of cash right there on his deathbed and tries to bribe her.
Just flat out bribes her.
He says, take this money, just open the box and let me burn the paper.
And Mary Garth refuses.
She absolutely refuses.
Why does she refuse? Because she loves Fred, right? This money would allow them to marry and live comfortably.
Because her moral integrity is not for sale.
Oh.
Eliot uses Mary to draw a hard, uncompromising line against the corrupting influence of unearned, speculative capital.
Mary knows that if she takes that bribe, if she alters a dying man's will in the dead of night, she becomes part of the corruption.
Exactly. She refuses to compromise her internal moral code, even though her refusal literally costs the man she loves his inheritance.
It is a staggering display of quiet, ironclad integrity.
It really is. And that tension between the old agrarian morality and the new speculative economy is playing out against a massive historical backdrop.
Right. The timeline of Middlemarch is set in the years immediately leading up to the 1832 Reform Bill.
We have to explain this to the learner to grasp the stakes here. The Reform Bill was one of the most monumental pieces of British legislation in the 19th century.
To put it simply, the British parliamentary system was wildly corrupt at the time.
Oh, completely broken.
You had these things called rotten boroughs.
Ancient medieval towns?
Yeah, ancient medieval towns with like 3 houses in them that still got to send 2 members of parliament to London.
Unbelievable.
Meanwhile, massive, booming new industrial cities like Manchester and Birmingham, with hundreds of thousands of people, had absolutely zero representation.
So the 1832 Reform Bill was designed to fix this, shifting political power away from the corrupt landed gentry and toward the newly wealthy industrial middle class.
The entire country was on the brink of revolution over this bill.
And Eliot brilliantly connects this macro-level political reform to the micro-level medical reform that Lydgate is trying to execute in the town.
Lydgate wants to build a new fever hospital. He wants to separate patients by contagious disease, implement modern scientific observation, and crucially, he wants to stop the practice of apothecaries prescribing endless, useless, expensive bottles of drugs just to make a profit.
But the immune system of the town attacks him.
The web strikes back.
Exactly. The old conservative doctors feel threatened by his French science. The townspeople are suspicious of his arrogance.
So Lydgate's pure scientific reform gets sucked right into the sticky political web of the town.
He realizes that to build his hospital, he needs funding.
Right.
And that need for capital forces him to make a political alliance with the most dangerous, morally compromised man in Middlemarch.
Nicholas Bulstrode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bulstrode. And Bulstrode's introduction marks a severe structural shift in the narrative.
It really does. Because just as the reader settles into what appears to be a sociological treatise on reform and marriage, Eliot injects a highly disruptive narrative technology.
The Gothic subplot.
It is such a wild pivot.
It comes out of nowhere.
Suddenly we are dealing with blackmail, stolen identities, and shadowy figures from the past.
Let's break down Bulstrode. He is the town's preeminent banker.
Right.
He is immensely wealthy, and he is a strict, punishing evangelical Christian.
Very judgmental.
Extremely. And the psychological mechanism of Bulstrode is that he uses his religious theology to justify his immense hunger for power.
He literally believes that his financial dominance over the town is empirical proof of God's favor.
Exactly. But Bulstrode's entire empire is built on rot.
Which brings us to John Raffles.
Yes. Now, a critical reader might ask, and this is a big question, why does George Eliot, the master of hyper-realistic, grounded social observation, suddenly introduce a scruffy, winking, alcoholic blackmailer who feels like he stepped out of a cheap Victorian penny dreadful?
He feels entirely out of place, like someone dropped a character from a Mary Shelley or Charles Dickens novel into this highly serious sociological study.
Right. But the inclusion of these Gothic elements is actually intentional.
How so?
Eliot uses the Gothic to disrupt the complacency of realist society. The Gothic is always about the return of the repressed.
Oh, okay.
Raffles is the walking embodiment of the sins that the respectable capitalist structure tries to bury.
And Raffles holds the key to Bulstrode's origin story.
Yes, he does.
We learn that decades ago, Bulstrode built his fortune on a stolen inheritance. He intentionally hid the existence of a young woman named Sarah Dunkirk so that he could marry a wealthy widow and inherit a fortune that rightfully belonged to Sarah.
And here is how the web pulls violently tight.
Wait for it.
Who is Sarah Dunkirk's grandson?
Will Ladislaw.
Will Ladislaw.
The bohemian artist that Casaubon hates, the man Dorothea is falling in love with, is the rightful heir to the fortune that built Bulstrode's bank.
It's all connected. Bulstrode's entire respected position in Middlemarch is bought with stolen money.
And now Raffles has arrived in town to bleed the banker dry.
This convergence of past sins and present desperation leads to the catastrophic climax of the novel.
Which involves Lydgate, unfortunately.
Yes. Lydgate, because of Rosamond's relentless, unyielding demand for luxury goods, is completely drowning in debt.
His furniture is about to be repossessed. He is literally suicidal with shame.
In his desperation, he goes to Bulstrode and begs for a loan.
And Bulstrode, who only cares about his own power, coldly turns him down.
But then the environment changes.
Raffles collapses.
Raffles, the blackmailer, collapses at Bulstrode's estate. He falls deathly ill with delirium tremens, severe alcohol withdrawal.
Right, and Lydgate is called in as the physician to treat him.
And Lydgate examines Raffles and gives Bulstrode incredibly specific modern medical instructions.
He says the patient is to have absolutely no alcohol, which was a controversial treatment at the time.
Right, and he is to be given only specific, regulated doses of opium.
So Bulstrode is sitting there, and he realizes that if Raffles survives this illness, his secret will be broadcast to the entire town.
His empire will collapse.
So a horrific calculus takes place in Bulstrode's mind.
When Lydgate comes back the next day and mentions his crushing debt again, Bulstrode suddenly hands him a massive check.
He completely clears Lydgate's debt.
It's a bribe, but it's completely unspoken.
And then the murder by omission happens.
Yes. Bulstrode sits outside Raffles' room. The housekeeper comes out and says Raffles is begging for alcohol and the opium isn't working.
And Bulstrode, knowing exactly what Lydgate commanded, deliberately disobeys the medical instructions.
He hands the housekeeper the key to the wine cellar and allows her to give Raffles brandy.
And Raffles dies shortly after.
Bulstrode doesn't strangle him. He simply manipulates the environment to ensure his death.
But the irony of the web is that you can never truly bury a secret.
Never. Raffles had already blabbed the secret of Bulstrode's past to a horse dealer before he died.
The rumor spreads like wildfire. The town discovers Bulstrode's criminal, hypocritical past.
And because Lydgate just happened to deposit a massive check from Bulstrode, the exact same week that Bulstrode's secret blackmailer mysteriously died under Lydgate's medical care.
The math looks terrible.
It looks so bad. The town operates on a crude, cynical logic. They naturally assume that the arrogant French-trained doctor finally showed his true colors.
They believe Lydgate took a massive bribe to look the other way while Bulstrode murdered his blackmailer.
The entire social web of Middlemarch turns on them both violently.
Bulstrode is publicly ruined, stripped of his power, and forced to leave town.
But the real tragedy is Lydgate. He only wanted to be a great scientist. He only wanted to cure the fever.
And now he is publicly disgraced, isolated, and presumed guilty of corruption and medical malpractice.
Even his wife, Rosamond, physically shrinks away from him because he's no longer a socially acceptable asset.
He is completely alone in the dark.
Which sets the stage for the true evolution of Dorothea's heroism.
Right, because at the beginning of the novel, Dorothea wanted to be St. Teresa.
She wanted to enact grandiose, abstract, theoretical charity, drawing up plans for cottages, translating ancient languages.
But when the entire town turns their backs on Lydgate, Dorothea steps into the breach.
She refuses to believe the gossip.
She believes in Lydgate's fundamental, underlying goodness.
And her heroism here isn't abstract. It is highly precise, interpersonal, and grounded in economic reality.
She publicly defends him. She uses her own wealth to permanently clear his debt to Bulstrode, freeing him from that toxic entanglement.
And then she takes it upon herself to walk directly into the lion's den.
She visits Rosamond.
She visits Rosamond to try and save their failing marriage.
That confrontation between Dorothea and Rosamond is one of the most electric scenes in Victorian literature.
Dorothea doesn't arrive to judge Rosamond or preach to her. She approaches this incredibly vain, shallow woman with pure, overwhelming empathy.
She explains Lydgate's suffering and shows Rosamond the true worth of her husband's devotion.
It is a moment of genuine, transcendent human connection that actually pierces through Rosamond's intense narcissism, even if only for a brief moment.
But to truly master this text, especially if you are sitting down for an exam on 19th century literature, we have to take a step back from the plot.
We have to look at the skeletal structure underneath the narrative.
We need to dissect the heavy philosophical ideologies that George Eliot is wrestling with.
The entire architecture of Middlemarch is built on the raging 19th century debate between determinism and free will.
Eliot was perhaps the most widely read novelist of her generation, and her work is a synthesis of three major European thinkers:
Auguste Comte, Charles Darwin, and Ludwig Feuerbach.
Let's unpack the mechanics of how each philosophy operates within the text. Let's start with Comte.
So Auguste Comte was a French philosopher, the founder of positivism, and essentially the father of modern sociology.
Okay, what was his main argument?
Comte argued that human society progresses through distinct historical stages, and that in the modern era, we must abandon theological superstitions and study society through observable scientific facts.
Right.
He viewed society as an organic whole, a complex system where every part depends on the others.
And Eliot absorbs this directly into her concept of the web.
Yes, exactly. She uses Comte's societal organicism to demonstrate that no action is private. Bulstrode's secret past in London decades ago physically alters the destiny of a doctor in Middlemarch today.
And then, looming over the entire 19th century, you have Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin, yes.
On the Origin of Species was published in 1859, just about a decade before Eliot began writing Middlemarch.
And Darwin's mechanism of natural selection and environmental adaptation is profound here.
Darwin argued that organisms must adapt to the specific pressures of their environment to survive.
In Middlemarch, Eliot maps this biological imperative onto human sociology. The characters are heavily constrained by their social environment.
What Eliot repeatedly refers to as the medium in which they move.
Right. Lydgate arrives in Middlemarch as a foreign organism. He refuses to adapt to the conservative, gossip-driven environment of the town.
He tries to impose his own will.
And as a result, the social environment acts as a pressure cooker. It treats him like an incompatible organism, starves him of resources, and expels him.
Which brings us to the third thinker, Ludwig Feuerbach, whom Eliot intimately understood because, as we discussed, she translated his masterwork, The Essence of Christianity.
Right, and Feuerbach argued that God did not create man, man created God. We projected our own highest ideals onto a deity.
Feuerbach's philosophy demands a pivot to humanism.
Exactly. If God is just a projection of human goodness, then we should stop looking up at the sky and start looking at each other.
We must focus on loving and serving humanity here on Earth, alleviating actual suffering rather than focusing on the salvation of the afterlife.
You can see the mechanism of Feuerbach's philosophy perfectly executed in Dorothea's character arc.
Because at the beginning of the novel, she is trapped in a theological mindset, looking for a winged messenger, projecting godlike qualities onto a fraud like Casaubon.
But by the end of the novel, she abandons the abstract divine. She adopts a pure, grounded humanism.
She uses her money and her empathy to physically rescue Lydgate and Rosamond in the here and now.
So the critical tension of the novel is this. If we're all shaped by Comte's societal web, Darwin's environmental pressures, and Feuerbach's humanism, do these characters actually have free will?
That's the big question. It's the ultimate question of determinism. Are they just puppets of macro-historical forces?
Well, Eliot's answer is a complex synthesis. Yes, the characters are heavily, brutally constrained by their medium.
But Eliot insists they are not absolved of their moral choices.
Exactly. Bulstrode is crushed by the web, but the web only catches him because of his own corrupt, greedy choices decades prior.
And Mary Garth faces the exact same economic pressures as Fred Vincy, but she uses her agency to refuse the bribe.
The characters are shaped by the labyrinth, but they still have to walk through it morally.
This friction between the individual and the system leads directly into the intense ideological debates that have raged around this book for a century.
Literary critics do not agree on whether Eliot actually pulled this off.
And we are going to present the two major opposing camps, completely impartially, to give you the critical history you need to form your own judgment.
On one side of the ideological divide, you have the Marxist critique, most prominently articulated by Terry Eagleton.
What's Eagleton's stance?
Eagleton argues that Middlemarch, for all its brilliance, fundamentally fails to resolve the structural conflict it sets up.
Why does he think it fails?
He posits an irreconcilable clash between the corporate realities of ruthless Victorian capitalism and the ideals of romantic individualism.
So to break Eagleton's argument down, he basically says Eliot identifies a massive systemic sickness in capitalism, the way money corrupts Bulstrode, the way debt traps Lydgate, but she refuses to offer a systemic solution.
Right. Eagleton thinks Eliot tries to force a happy, individualized resolution onto a society that is inherently fractured by class conflict.
He views the ending, particularly Will Ladislaw's eventual integration into mainstream reform politics, as an artificial, ideologically conflicted compromise.
Eagleton basically argues Eliot is trying to press a localized bandage on a gaping systemic wound.
Conversely, you have critics like D.A. Miller who champion a pluralistic reading of the novel.
Right. Miller takes the opposite view.
Miller argues that what Eagleton calls a failure of resolution is actually the novel's greatest triumph.
Because Miller believes the strength of Middlemarch is its pluralism, its refusal to offer a utopian, totalizing solution.
He suggests that Eliot intentionally avoids clean resolutions because she recognizes that life itself is an endless balancing act of competing viewpoints, partial victories, and necessary compromises.
For Miller, the fact that the novel doesn't solve capitalism isn't a failure, it's a testament to its supreme realism.
Those are two massive, heavy frameworks to apply to your reading. But there is a third major ideological lens we have to examine, and it centers on the woman question.
The woman question.
We have to look at the timeline. The narrative of Middlemarch is set in the early 1830s, right before the Reform Bill. But George Eliot actually sat down to write it 40 years later, in the early 1870s.
That 40-year gap is what the critic Gillian Beer famously termed the unwritten years.
Why is that timeline crucial?
Because between the 1830s and the 1870s, the early feminist movement made massive structural strides in British society.
Right. The Married Women's Property Bill was debated and eventually passed, giving women the legal right to own the money they earned, which they completely lacked in the 1830s.
And the push for female higher education gained immense traction.
So you have George Eliot living this radically independent, highly educated, fiercely autonomous life in the 1870s, writing a novel about brilliant women in the 1830s who have absolutely zero options.
And this temporal distortion has made some prominent feminist critics, like Kate Millett and Zelda Austin, incredibly angry with George Eliot.
Their critique is essentially, George Eliot, you escaped the trap. You lived a liberated life, so why did you use your pen to force all your brilliant, capable heroines back into traditional, restrictive, patriarchal marriages?
Why couldn't Dorothea Brooke become an independent political force? Why does she have to rely on men?
It is a fierce and entirely valid critique.
The counter-argument, which many historians of the novel defend, lies in Eliot's absolute commitment to socio-psychological realism.
She couldn't just invent a feminist utopia in 1830.
Exactly. Eliot could not, in good faith, grant Dorothea the legal and social freedoms of the 1870s when the character was biologically trapped in the 1830s.
Eliot accurately, ruthlessly depicted the structural ceilings that women faced regarding lack of education, barred inheritance, and forced domesticity.
To have Dorothea suddenly become a fully emancipated, modern feminist icon would violate the very laws of historical determinism that Eliot spent 800 pages establishing.
She couldn't magically invent a door that didn't exist in 1830. She had to show the absolute strength of the cage to prove why the bird couldn't fly.
Which brings us to the grand finale of this massive, sprawling narrative. Let's look at how it all ends for our idealistic St. Teresa, Dorothea Brooke.
Following Casaubon's death, Dorothea inherits his massive estate and his fortune.
However, Casaubon's insecurity and control extended beyond the grave.
He leaves behind a toxic will, what the novel famously titles The Dead Hand.
Casaubon includes a cruel, highly specific codicil, stating that if Dorothea ever marries Will Ladislaw, she will immediately forfeit her entire fortune and the estate.
It is the ultimate act of patriarchal control. He is literally trying to choke her from beyond the grave.
He suspected during his life that Ladislaw and Dorothea shared a connection, so he weaponizes his massive wealth to keep her permanently trapped as his mourning widow.
Tending to his obsolete mythology notes forever.
But Dorothea, who has spent the entire novel evolving from a naive theorist into a deeply empathetic humanist, makes her final choice.
When she and Will Ladislaw finally confront their feelings for one another, she realizes that keeping the estate means living in a tomb.
She makes the ultimate sacrifice of material capital for emotional truth. She renounces the wealth.
She gives up Casaubon's estate entirely to marry Will Ladislaw. In one of the most powerful moments in the text, she explicitly declares to Will, "I hate my wealth."
She chooses love, freedom, and poverty over the gilded material cage.
So, learner, as we pull out of the incredibly dense depths of Middlemarch, let's solidify the core architecture you need to carry with you.
First up, the web.
Everything is connected. Eliot maps biological tissue theory onto human sociology, proving that the actions of a corrupt banker will dictate the fate of a brilliant doctor.
Second, the Teresa complex. The tragic, crushing tension between grand female idealism and a society that offers absolutely no outlet for that intellect.
Third, the unromantic, grinding psychological realism of marriage. We saw the disasters of Casaubon's intellectual hoarding and Lydgate's fatal patriarchal spots of commonness.
And finally, the philosophical machinery. A world governed by Comte's organic society, Darwinian environmental pressures, and Feuerbach's call for grounded interpersonal humanism.
Middlemarch is a novel that demands you abandon the simple X-ray.
It forces you to look at the entirety of a society, to understand that you cannot diagnose the individual without diagnosing the environment that surrounds them.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
When the book finally closes, Dorothea Brooke has given up her grand architectural plans for reforming society.
She doesn't build her cottages. Instead, she marries Will Ladislaw, she moves to London, and she is, as Eliot explicitly writes, absorbed into the life of another.
She becomes a supportive wife to Will's political career.
So think deeply about this. By ending the novel this way, with Dorothea's grand ambitions quietly folding into a man's career, did George Eliot ultimately prove her feminist critics right?
Is this ending a realistic, beautiful triumph of pure humanistic love over toxic, controlling wealth?
Or is it a quiet, tragic surrender to the very patriarchal structures that Eliot just spent 800 pages ruthlessly critiquing?
It is the ultimate diagnostic challenge for the reader. The book provides the evidence, but it demands that you synthesize the final verdict.
Exactly. The X-ray machine is still broken, the waters are still muddy, but maybe now you know exactly how to swim in them. Thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive into the labyrinth of Middlemarch.